Hey everyone! ChatGPT Taylor aka Taylor here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is another edition of something that I tried last week. Last week, I tried to give Dan a more interesting storyline in Season 1 without disrupting the elimination order or other major events of that season. And to my surprise, that video was actually well received. So this week, I decided to give it a try with another camper. And that camper is Tess. From what I've seen in the Disventure Camp community, Tess is generally not viewed in a positive light due to her appearances in Season 3. Most of the criticism seems to come from her general role as a support character throughout the season, her lack of clear motivation to try and win the show, and her decision-making that left many wondering what her true intentions were. I've definitely spent a few videos joking about Tess being boring, but even I wish that Tess had a bit more relevancy in Season 3. So, I'll be challenging myself to give Tess an interesting plotline for her Season 3 appearance. And with that, let's get started. Before I begin, make sure to like and subscribe if this video is to your liking, and make sure to comment down below if there's anything that you would like to see going forward. There are two key rules that I want to establish before I begin this endeavor. Firstly, I have to keep the elimination order the same. AKA, I still have to create a plotline for Tess that can satisfactorily end in episode 9. And secondly, I can't change any of the major events of the season. The reason why I'm putting these rules in place is so I can show how Tess could have been given an interesting storyline while maintaining the main storylines that the creators wanted to implement for the season. I also think it makes the endeavor more challenging, since I can't just throw away someone else's development just to give Tess a good storyline. And with that, let's get started. For this episode, because it doesn't contain a lot of gameplay, I want to use this time to establish Tess's mindset going into the season. And even though there are only 3 major scenes involving Tess in this episode, I think these scenes are enough to showcase Tess's mindset. I think the scene in the airport with Gabby and Ellie can stay the same, since this shows Tess's friendly demeanor, as well as her connection with Ellie. I also think the scene in the airplane with Lake can stay the same, since this shows Tess's passion for art as well as her friendly demeanor. However, the interview with Emily is where I'm changing things. In canon, Tess said that she only came back to spend more time with Ali and Hunter. While I still want her to do that, I would change Tess's answer. Instead, Tess would say that she wants to try and play the game again now that she's in a much better headspace. It goes without saying that Tess wasn't in the best frame of mind in Season 2. So now that she's in a much better state this time, she feels confident that she can play the game a lot better than before. Not only does this statement establish that Tess is in a much healthier point in her life than last season, it also establishes that Tess is here to play the game, and that her desire to play comes from herself, rather than from someone else. Later on in the interview, Emily asked Tess if she has any issue with being Hunter and Ali's third wheel. Canonically, Tess said that she had no issue, that she was the one who motivated Ali to confirm things with Hunter, and that she hopes to help them through their rough patch. I still think that Tess should say these things, but I would add one statement. When Tess says that she wants to help Ali and Hunter, I want her to emphasize that Hunter and Ali were always there for her, so she needs to be there for them. Specifically, no matter how resistant I was, they never gave up on me. And I can't give up on them. There's always a way to help. Not only does this statement show Tess's support for Hunter and Ali, but it also shows Tess's belief that no matter how dire the situation is, it's always worth trying to help. And this belief is something that Tess will have to tangle with throughout the competition. Canonically, Episode 2 is a slower episode for Tess, and she doesn't get many moments to shine. But considering how the focus for Tess's team in this episode is on their lack of cohesion, I think we should incorporate Tess's story into her team's issues for this episode. Specifically, Tess's main scene in this episode is during the thunderstorm at night, where Tess mentions that thunderstorms make her feel helpless and alone. Perhaps if someone asked Tess how she manages to get past that feeling, Tess would explain that she's been in much darker and scarier situations in her life, and she's managed to get past those spots, so this isn't too bad for her. Maybe this could parlay into a confessional where Tess explains that her stress management has gotten a lot better, and despite the fact that she's been in some really dark spots in her life, she's been able to get out of it, and she hopes that she can help people get out of tough spots. This further shows Tess's mentality for this season, and it will be referenced in future episodes. Additionally, I want to add an extra scene to give a little taste of what's to come for Tess's game. In the scene where the Teal team is huddled up in the tent, Ellie and Tom end up starting an argument over Ellie's actions towards Tom and Jake in a previous season. Perhaps after Gabby steps in to try and defuse the argument, Tess could step in and try to mediate the conversation. Drawing on her personal experience that even the darkest of scenarios can be salvaged, she encourages Ellie and Tom to talk out their feelings in a civil manner. However, considering Ellie and Tom's personalities, this only leads to them making crude remarks at each other. Perhaps Tom calls out Ellie for not being civil during her post-game interviews, while Ellie notes that Tom is notorious for not talking to others. This forces Gabby to step in to defuse the argument, and Tess ends the episode with a brief glimpse that not everyone is as open to the ideas of change and reconciliation like she is. The rest of the episode still plays out the same way, with the yellow team losing the challenge and James being eliminated first. This will be a big episode for Tess, since this will be our first glimpse into Tess's approach to gameplay. Now, there are 3 scenes that I want to focus on for Tess. The first scene is during the challenge, when Tess comments that all the girls on the team are like a happy family. This leads into the 4 girls making an all-girl alliance. I still want this event to take place, and in particular, I want it to be emphasized that Tess is elated that she has a solid alliance that she does not want to deviate from. Perhaps she mentions in a new confessional that it's always good to have a support system around you that you can completely rely on, and that she's hopeful that this all-girl alliance can be loyal to each other. This scene, however, wouldn't change the outcome of the challenge, as the teal team still loses. The next scene is directly after the challenge, where the all-girls alliance deliberates on who to vote out. This generally stays the same, where Ellie questions Lake's commitment to the alliance, and Tess still insists that they need to vote for one of the boys, showing her loyalty to the alliance. And once Lake arrives and briefly argues with Ellie on who to vote for, Tess would break them up, reaffirming that they need to agree on their target for the sake of their alliance. This event would show Tess's current belief that they need to stay loyal to each other first and foremost. But it's during the elimination ceremony where Tess will get her moment to show her true playstyle. Most of the canon events stay the same, where Ellie throws Lake under the bus to Aiden and Tom. Aiden and Lake pledge to vote for Ellie in response. Tom is left mildly confused on what to do, Gabby is scared out of her mind, and Tess is turned to as the swing vote. However, one thing that I want to change is Tess's response to Ellie and Lake's pleas. In canon, Tess just stayed silent when Ellie and Lake ask her to stick with them. But in this timeline, I want Tess to stand up, publicly address her all-girl alliance, and call on them to stick together. I could imagine Tess saying something like, "I know that there's a lot of drama and betrayal tonight. But I'm asking one more time, for my alliance to stick together. We can still make it through this night intact." What this moment would do is highlight 2 key tenets of Tess's strategy. Number 1. Loyalty above all. This public attempt to corral her allies together shows Tess's preference for loyalty towards her allies. And number 2. Nothing is unsalvageable. Remember, we established back in episode 1 that Tess recognizes that Hunter and Allie never gave up on her despite how hopeless it might have seemed. Therefore, even though making a plea for Ellie and Lake to stick together might seem really stupid, it's in character for Tess to make this kind of move, because she's ingrained with the belief that nothing is unsalvageable. Maybe Tess would try to mediate by telling Lake that she doesn't have to vote for Aiden, but that the alliance should not collapse on each other. But despite these attempts, Lake is still voted out by a tally of 3 to 2 to 1. All the votes are the same as in canon, except for Tess, who votes for Aiden in hopes that Tess's own pleas convinced Ellie and Gabby to revert to the original plan. Lake generally leaves in good spirits, and Tess exits the episode distraught that her efforts to maintain loyalty and salvage her alliance did not work. This episode will mainly focus on Tess's reaction to the events of the previous episode. Now in this episode, Tess's only scene where she's a main focus is the very first scene of the episode, where she comforts Aiden about Lake's elimination. Now, even though Tess did vote for Aiden in this timeline, I still think Aiden would be okay with talking to Tess, since Aiden did admit during their conversation that he understands it's all a game. I don't want to take anything away from this conversation. I still want Tess to console Aiden about the elimination and encourage him to have confidence in himself and continue fighting on James and Lake's behalf. However, I want to add to this conversation. After Aiden thanks Tess for encouraging him, Tess would comment that sometimes, all you need is some encouragement to become happier, and that it took a while for her to learn that. Aiden would comment that Tess certainly seems more peppy than she did in Season 2, and Tess would admit that a lot of that has to do with her growth between Season 2 and Season 3. Aiden would ask how she did it, and this would give Tess an opportunity to explain how exactly she changed between seasons. Instead of the generic response of, "Allie and Hunter helped me," we could get some actual details about Tess's life in between seasons. Tess would start by explaining that Allie and Hunter spent a good amount of time with her after the season. And after a few months of just talking with them and hanging out with them, she realized that spending time around people can be nice when they are actually people that are worth spending time with. But when Tess went off to college without Hunter and Allie, Tess was left with a choice. She could stay alone and risk falling back into the hole that she was in before Season 2. Or she could try and reach out to make friends that could help keep her in the state of mind that she's in. She ended up going with the latter option, and she discovered that it's a lot easier to find people you enjoy being around when you share a core common interest. In this case, Tess managed to find friends who are also art majors, just like her. From these experiences, not only would Tess fully accept that having willing support from others can be a good thing, but she would also realize that taking a leap of faith to try and reach out to others can also produce wonderful things. Aiden would then rationalize that this is why Tess is trying so hard to keep the team together and is reaching out to people even if she doesn't know them that well. This new event not only maintains Tess's supportive nature from the canon season, but it also ties Tess's actions to her personal beliefs and her character. This allows her character to be established with a bit more depth, rather than someone who supports others just for the sake of supporting them, which I think was the main issue with Tess's storyline in the canon season. The rest of the episode plays out the same. The yellow team loses the challenge, and Miriam is voted out. But Miriam's elimination will help give Tess another big moment in the next episode. For this episode, Tess is going to get more of a spotlight, and we're going to focus on indicating how Tess wants to continue playing the game, now that her first attempts to keep her team together failed. Tessa's first big scene occurs when the teal team reads Miriam's letter, which exposes Ellie being in the villain's alliance. Most of this scene would remain the same. Tess would try and get the team to civilly talk through their issues, but the team ends up fracturing, with Aiden and Tom on one side, and Gabby and Ellie on the other. In her confessional, Tess will still acknowledge that Tom and Aiden aren't entirely wrong for their outburst, and that Ellie at this moment is different from the Ellie she knew in college. However, despite Tess acknowledging that Ellie can be reached, Tess would comment that salvaging her team's cohesion will be more difficult than she originally anticipated. This is important as this would show that despite the events of episode 3, Tess is still confident that she will be able to corral everyone and bring her team together, even if it will take more time. Sure, this objectively might be the wrong way to think, but it's at least consistent with Tess's character, and it shows how deeply Tess feels about being able to help others in need. The next major scene is when Tess and Ellie are riding bikes up the hill. The start of this scene would stay the same, with Tess asking Ellie if she's okay, and Ellie explaining that there's a lot at stake for her, since the $3 million prize would really help turn her life around. For me, I would want this interaction to be followed by a confessional from Tess, where Tess acknowledges that Ellie being stressed out by her current financial struggles is a very valid feeling, and that it makes Tess's situation tougher because although she doesn't blame Aiden and Tom for blowing up at Ellie, Tess also recognizes that there's a lot on the line for Ellie. Tess is then left with a conundrum of having to choose between the people who are right versus the people who could really use her support, thereby putting Tess's morals in jeopardy. And the final major scene for Tess in this episode is when she talks to Hunter about his struggles with Allie. I still think the canon events of this scene should still take place. We still learn about how Allie's comments are getting to her, and Tess acknowledges that Hunter and Allie are going through a lot more than they thought. However, in the confessional following this interaction, I want to add a line to Tess that connects this situation back to her. Now, a key moment in this interaction that I want to reference is that when Hunter tells Tess about Allie's stressors, Tess comments, "She always said she was doing okay over text," with Hunter replying, "She barely lets me in on it." From this particular segment of the conversation, I want Tess to state in her confessional that, "This is why I try to reach out to people and make sure they're doing okay. Sometimes people are scared to let others in and admit that something is wrong, and I want to help show them that there's nothing wrong with admitting that something's not okay." These statements would accomplish two things. One, instead of Tess just passively acknowledging Hunter and Allie's struggles, Tess is actively connecting this moment to herself and allowing the audience to see why she acts the way she acts, which helps establish her character. And two, it helps establish why Tess will continue to try and support people in the most dire of situations, despite what happened back in episode 3. It may not be the smartest move by Tess, but it's at least in character for Tess, which is very important. And with that, the episode pretty much ends the same way. The magenta team still loses the challenge, and Hunter is blindsided by a 3-2 vote. That's it. Now, the canonical episode 6 didn't give Tess many moments to shine. Her biggest scene is a confessional near the beginning of the episode. This confessional takes place after Tom and Ellie have a civil conversation. From this conversation, Tess comments that it's the calm before the storm, and that they're all thinking who's going to mess it up and draw first blood. I still think this confessional should take place, but I want Tess to add something like, "Once this happens, I'll be ready to step in and mediate." This would echo Tess's mindset from the end of the last episode and establish her motivations going forward. However, this doesn't mean that Tess's relevancy in this episode ends here. I'm actually going to give Tess a brand new scene in this episode. This scene would take place after the magenta team's performance, where the teal team is shown reacting to said performance. We all saw Gabby cheering on the magenta team, as well as Aiden noting how obvious it was that Jake was looking towards Tom. But the scene that I want to add is between Tess and Ellie. Tess, being observant, would point out how Jake seemed angry at Tom. Ellie would laugh in agreement, noting how Jake must have been really angry about Tom and Aiden's kiss. Concerned, Tess would claim that watching Jake being angry isn't something to laugh about. This is where Ellie would drop a bombshell on Tess and whisper to her the truth, admitting that she orchestrated the kiss to intentionally make Jake lose his mind. Tess would then tell Ellie that what she did was wrong, while Ellie would claim that it's both personal and strategic, since it throws Jake off his game. This scene would be followed by a confessional from Tess, where she comments that Ellie is playing so villainously, that she doesn't have to be so villainous even if she's desperate for the prize money, and that she doesn't even seem remorseful about it. All of this makes Tess declare that she needs to confront Ellie about this later on. The reason why I want to add in this whole new scene is because I think it's critical for Tessa's overall development. Tess will eventually have to come to terms with the fact that Ellie won't stop being this way as long as she's in the game. This would force Tess to choose between abandoning her mindset and declaring Ellie a lost cause, or sticking true to her mindset and keeping Ellie in the game, even if it's not a good game move. But to get to this point, it's important that we at least establish early enough that Tess sees how corrupted Ellie has become by malice, and that this is the start of Tess realizing that she might not be able to help Ellie. And with that, the episode ends the same. The yellow team loses, Connor is voted out, and Tess exits the episode realizing that she can't wait to address her team's issues. Now in this episode, Tess gets two major scenes, neither of which involves her directly confronting Ellie about her behavior. So, I want to start by creating a new scene involving Tess and Ellie to start the episode. The scene would start with Ellie looking for the immunity totem, which is interrupted when Tess approaches her, wanting to talk to her. Now, this is almost a mirror of what happened in the canon episode 8, but I don't think it matters if we sort of copy this scene, especially if we change Ellie's reaction in both scenes. For this scene, Ellie would be less riled up, as she simply asks Tess to not tell anyone about her efforts. Tess would agree, but then she would tell Ellie that her actions in the last challenge weren't okay, and that she doesn't need to be that villainous to win. Unfortunately for Tess, Ellie would insist that she has a lot of enemies in the game, and that she needs to keep people on edge in order to increase her chances at beating them. And despite Tess pleading with Ellie to see that she's being evil, Ellie would not budge, insisting that it would be more evil for her to not play hard, get eliminated, and deprive herself of a chance to change her life. The reason why this scene is so important is because this is where Tess realizes that Ellie doesn't feel like she's doing anything wrong. This would become evident in a confessional following this scene, where Tess is forced to admit that it's hard to help someone who doesn't want help. This forces Tess to reflect and figure out what she can realistically do if someone doesn't want her support, which will be key in her development later on. The next big scene for Tess is during part 1 of the challenge, where Tess offers Allie a chance to talk out her feelings regarding Hunter's elimination, and mentions that she'll always be available to talk. This scene does a good job of reinforcing Tess's supportive side, so I still want to keep it. However, I want to extend this scene by including a section where Tess tells Allie about her struggles to help her team, and asks why she's not able to help her team in the same way that Allie and Hunter help her. Allie would tell Tess that while it's admirable that she wants to help her teammates, a big reason why Tess was able to change is because she eventually grew to want to change, and that's usually the biggest hurdle to get over. This added bit is important, because much like the previous scene, it helps Tess realize that Ellie could only be helped if she wants help, and it makes Tess think about how she can get Ellie to realize that she needs help. This extension is also important because this makes this conversation a two-way street, where both participants are giving and receiving advice, rather than just one person being a therapist for the other, which is a criticism that I've seen about Tessa's character. This realization would match perfectly with Tessa's third scene, where she comforts Gabby after she discovers that Ellie lied to her about being in the villain's alliance. I'm happy with the canon events of this section still taking place. Tess would acknowledge Ellie's recent devious behavior, Gabby would express fear of confronting Ellie due to her competitiveness, and Tess would offer to talk to Ellie first. This scene is important as it sets up the events of the next episode, where Tess confronts Ellie again. This episode then ends similarly, with the Magenta team losing, Fiore being voted out, and Tess exiting the episode with a plan to hopefully get Ellie back on the right track. For this episode, we're going to see the climax of Tessa's battle between what's realistic and what she desires. To start, we're going to keep the scene of Tess approaching Ellie when she's searching for a totem. But instead of being calm like in the previous episode, Ellie would simply ask Tess to keep watch for her, which maintains what happened in canon while also showing Ellie's hyperfixation on the game. In this scene, Tess reveals to Ellie that Gabby knows that she lied about being in the villain's alliance, and that she's upset about it. Although Tess hopes that the idea of Ellie's girlfriend being upset would make her want to change, Ellie would just half-heartedly insist that Gabby understands that she needs to focus on the game, and that she will eventually get over it. Shocked by what Ellie just said, Tess would ask Ellie if she's willing to lose her girlfriend over $3 million, which is what Tess mentioned in canon. That's where Ellie unleashes her famous quote, "Okay, you're being so extra right now, Tess," claiming that she would obviously choose Gabby over the prize, but that there's no way that Gabby will leave her right now. Maybe Ellie pulls a quote that Tess told her in episode 5, and she says, "You don't know Gabby like I do. I can decide that for myself." This is a key interaction for Tess, because it makes Tess fully realize that Ellie doesn't feel like she needs help. And while she was exposed to this idea in previous episodes, Tess didn't accept it until after this scene. This pushes Tess's development because now that Tess realizes that Ellie won't accept her support, Tess now has to decide whether it's worth continuing to try and support Ellie. On one hand, Tess does feel bad for Ellie's financial situation, and giving up on her would go against Tess's original mindset of nothing being unsalvageable. However, Tess will also remember what Ellie told her in the previous episode, and Tess's actions are futile if Ellie doesn't want support, which is what's happening. Perhaps Tess has a new confessional where she recognizes that she came back because she wanted to play with a fresh mindset, and debates whether it's worth fixating on something that is not fixable at this point in time. Moving on, Tessa's next major scene is in the spaceship, where Gabby wants to win a stuffed bunny for Ellie. I don't think I want to change this scene, because it does give a nice little factoid about Tess, which is that she's good at claw machine games and has a lot of stuffed animals from them. I don't know. It's just a nice fact to me. But the big scene for Tess is before the elimination ceremony. I think the start of the scene remains the same. Aiden goes up to Tess and asks if she'll consider voting for Ellie. Tess says that she doesn't know, considering that she knows Ellie outside the game. This is when Ellie walks up and angrily asks for Aiden to leave. Aiden does leave, but before he does, I want to add one line to Aiden. I want him to turn towards Tess and ask, seriously, how could you want to side with her? How did someone as nice as you become friends with someone like her? The reason why this line is so important is because it makes Tess realize something entirely new. And in her next confessional, Tess voices the realization that not only are Ellie's antics hurting Gabby, but Tess is starting to be seen in a worse light because of Ellie. And in that confessional where she admits that someone will be mad at her no matter what she chooses to do, Tess voices that she has to choose between two extreme actions. 1. She sticks true to her morals by saving Ellie, but risks ruining her own game in the process. Or 2. She tries to salvage her own perception by voting out Ellie, but she would have to go against the mentality that she entered the season with, which is, nothing is unsalvageable. This is the point of no return for Tess, and it must be solved now. In the end, Tess still cast the deciding vote to eliminate Ellie by a vote of 3-2. However, it's different this time around because of Tessa's motivation. In this universe, Tessa's motivation to get rid of Ellie is because Tess realizes that sticking with Ellie would hurt her own game, and that she didn't come back to throw her own game away. The reason why it's so important to establish this new motivation for Tess is because I feel like a lot of people had a problem with Tessa's canon reasoning for voting out Ellie. In canon, Tess said that she voted out Ellie for her own good, and that the game was unhealthy for her. However, a lot of people pointed out that if Tess really cared for Ellie's own good, she wouldn't have denied Ellie a chance to win money that would change her whole life. So, having Tess explicitly state that sticking with Ellie would hurt her own game is important, as it establishes that Tess is merely thinking about what's good for her own game, rather than acting like she's on a moral high ground and knows what's best for everyone. And I don't think having this motivation is out of character for Tess. After all, she tried her absolute best to support Ellie, it's just that Ellie didn't want her support. And Tessa's reasoning for focusing on herself came from Allie's advice, and it makes sense for Tess to take Allie's reasoning to heart considering that Allie helped her out of a very dark place. So, Ellie still goes home, and Tess exits the episode having strayed away from her original mindset. Now, this is Tessa's elimination episode, so we need to be able to wrap up Tessa's story arc in this episode. To help support this, I want to include a little scene at the beginning of the episode, where Gabby is out of camp, leaving Tess, Aiden, and Tom in camp. In this scene, Tess would start by admitting that she feels bad for voting out Ellie. Aiden and Tom would obviously say that Tess shouldn't feel bad, since Ellie was not a good person to be around. However, Tess would explain her situation, noting that she only got better because her closest friends never gave up on her, and that she feels selfish for giving up on Ellie. That's where Aiden and Tom would assure Tess that trying to help Ellie see the error of her ways wasn't entirely wrong, but that continuing to try and help her despite Ellie's resistance would have been worse, and that Tess doesn't have to tear herself down in order to help others. This statement really hits Tess, and this is where Tess finally recognizes that while it's definitely okay to help others, some things truly can be unsalvageable if they don't want to be helped, and that Tess isn't a bad person for backing out when she realizes that a situation is beyond her control. It's sort of like Tess realizes that while it's not bad to support others, supporting can't be the only thing that you do, or else it brings down your character. Which is kind of meta since that's a major reason why people don't really like Tess in this community. Anyways, Tess's next scene is when she tries to console Gabby about Ellie's elimination. But instead of Tess saying that keeping Ellie in the game would only make her worse, Tess would insist that she tried her best to help Ellie, and that she couldn't risk making her own game worse when Ellie didn't think she was in the wrong. It's important that this change is made, because if we keep Tess's canon explanation for her flip vote, it makes it seem like Tess views herself on a moral high ground, which is not a good move for any character. With this new explanation, Tess is establishing that she's not just a support character for others, and that she's actually thinking about what's best for herself and becoming her own character, which is important for her. That being said, I think Tess would still try and offer herself as a shoulder to lean on for Gabby, since Tess doesn't view her frayed friendship with Gabby as being unsalvageable. This all leads up to the elimination ceremony, and honestly, I don't think anything leading up to the vote needs to change. When Gabby shows signs of defecting to the villains, Tess would correctly point out that the villains' alliance is taking advantage of Gabby and that they didn't vote out Ellie due to spite. Now, I'm going to go off on a brief tangent, but bear with me. Was the move personal for Tom and Aiden? Absolutely. But having it be personal is not inherently spiteful. It's not like it was against their better judgment to kick out Ellie. Kicking out Ellie was both the right strategic move and also a personal move. And I know some people had a problem earlier in the episode with Tom and Aiden claiming that the move was only strategic and not personal when it very clearly was personal. Some called it hypocritical, but honestly, that fits Tom and Aiden's characters really well. After all, Tom told Jake that they needed to communicate with each other, yet Tom kept avoiding Jake early in this season. And Aiden told Jake that it was a game after he took the bird from him in episode 2, yet got mad at Jake when he threw away Aiden's keycard in episode 8. So, hypocrisy is in character for Aiden and Tom. But anyways, the ending remains the same, as Gabby flips to send home Tess by a vote of 5-3. And while Tess is disappointed, she leaves in good spirits, telling her teammates that she wishes them the best of luck. And with that, Tess exits the show with a new mindset, reminding herself that while it's okay to help others, there's no point in setting herself on fire to keep others warm. And that brings an end to Tessa's new storyline for the season. Overall, my goal for Tessa's storyline was to put her in situations where her morals are going to be continuously challenged, questioned, and tested. Tess has always been more of a moral player than a ruthless player, so I think it made sense to focus on her consistent moral dilemmas. And most importantly, I wanted to give Tess a storyline that not only boosts her up from being solely a support character, but it also helps her realize that while supporting others is not inherently bad, only supporting others at the cost of your own well-being is bad. Because in life, extremes aren't always the best. You don't have to completely commit one way or another for a solution, because there's often a happy medium to find. I guess it shows that in life, nothing is completely black or white, and that there are a lot more gray areas than we would think. And for an artist like Tess, I think that message rings true to her in more ways than one. And that about does it for this video. Do you agree with my storyline? Do you disagree? What moments would you include to give Tess an improved storyline? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like the video, click subscribe if you really like the video, and for some ending words of wisdom. If you're going to have an epic line like, "It's not my time to go yet," then you better make moves to show that you're here to play. Otherwise that line just looks out of place. Thank you, and farewell.